I know it's not going to come as a shock to any of you watching when I say that the healthcare industry in America is incredibly broken. We spend almost double most other advanced economies, and yet we have measurably worse outcomes, lower life expectancy, higher infant mortality, more easily preventable deaths, far lower early intervention methods, not to mention the general stress that goes along with the trip to the hospital, which means a lot of people just don't go until it's too late. Now again, I know none of this is shocking to you, but these frictions, failures, and financial incentives have all become so ingrained into a system that has in turn become so ingrained into our country that it raises a rather concerning question. Would it even be possible to unfuck the healthcare system without destroying the economy in the process? The USA is the largest market in the world thanks to the disproportionate share of our economy dedicated to consumer spending. This is a statistic that even I have highlighted here before on this channel, because it makes us look like we just love buying overpriced trucks and useless consumer junk. And while maybe that's still true, if you remove healthcare spending from this equation, we are actually right in line with most other peer countries. Put another way, if we actually demolished the healthcare system and built something somewhat efficient in its place, we would cut out as much as 10% of our GDP. Now, 10% of our entire economic output going towards spinning the wheels of medical bureaucracy isn't great, but this broken window still represents millions of jobs, not to mention a lot of our financial system. They might contribute nothing outside of justifying their own existence, but now that they are there, they are extremely hard to remove. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Just because something is hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And even for the people who don't believe in socialized medicine, the bureaucratic bloat in healthcare is still a problem. But it's also important to realize that no policymaker wants to preside over millions of lost jobs, even if it would fix one of the biggest ongoing burdens on the nation. Oh yeah, and one last thing. Before all of you non-Americans start feeling too smug about the rock and a hard place we have wedged ourselves into, it's probably worth exploring how we have exported this issue across the world to the point where there is a pretty good chance we are making your health outcomes worse as well.
I think what's happening today is actually quite important, which is a reflection of the sprawling bureaucracy that's actually making America sick.
Families have to check their bank account before seeing a doctor. The result is that manageable conditions go untreated until they become emergencies, which is worse, of course, for the patient.
Younger Americans die earlier than young people in other developed countries. That statistics drags down the overall American life expectancy. American men ranked last among the 17 countries in that study. Women, by the way, were second to last.
Now, before we get into it, I think a bit of context is in order. About 5 years ago, I was personally very much a part of the problem in this industry. I worked as an investment banker specializing in businesses operating specifically in healthcare. The scale of the regulations and business activity that takes place in the system between you and your medical care was big enough that several firms could specialize in just serving these companies. The fact that several investment banks can be kept afloat just off the fees they charge as a middleman on transactions between other middlemen in the medical industry should give you a sense of just how much bloat has been piled onto the end goal of treating illness. In fact, the broken incentives, lobbying, anti-competitive business practices, and simple entrenched interest was part of the reason why I started this channel to begin with. It's easy and honestly a little bit cathartic to anthropomorphize the players in this game and group them into heroes and villains. But to get a good understanding of the problem, it's a lot more productive to follow the simple conflicting incentives that have logjammed the system so badly that it's basically impossible to get things done without stepping on someone else's toes. So in the interest of fairness, I want to start with the doctors themselves. Because of course, typically they get much less blame than something like an insurance company, because well, they actually achieve something. But they still have incentives of their own and bodies that lobby aggressively to protect those interests. Becoming a doctor, and especially a specialist, takes a long time, and puts most students into a massive amount of debt. According to the AAMC, the median medical student was graduating $205,000 in debt, and that's accounting for some people who were able to get a scholarship or had parents to fund their education. For students going the private college route, that number can be as high as $400,000. To compensate for these immense upfront costs and several years of lost earnings compared to their peers, it's always been the expectation that American doctors are paid extremely well. And on average, they are. Physicians in America are paid on average almost double that of other OECD countries, and even extremely high-income outliers like Switzerland. Oh, and as something of foreshadowing, you might have noticed that Canada is right up there with us, but more on that later. In a lot of other countries, being a doctor is still a prestigious and highly respected job, but it doesn't come with nearly the same expectation of earnings. And in America, this wasn't by mistake either. The American Medical Association, which represents physicians, has lobbied Congress relentlessly to limit residency positions for students graduating from medical school. The Medicare graduate medical education funding has remained more or less intact since 1997, but during that same time, we have added 70 million people to our population. This has all limited the supply of doctors to the point where the AAMC estimates that we will have 139,000 fewer physicians than we need by 2033 as our population continues to age. But on the demand side, there has been just as much meddling. One of the other big pushes by the AMA is to make sure that there are lots of things that can only legally be done by a doctor, even when they could be done by a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, or a non-physician specialist like an occupational therapist for a lot of this work. Now, of course, something like brain surgery should probably require a specialist to be present, but a lot of the tasks that legally only doctors can perform really aren't that important or that sensitive. One of the most egregious examples of this scope creep is the amount of time that doctors spend justifying routine prescriptions and procedures to health insurance providers. Now, despite being some more foreshadowing about how bureaucracy creates bureaucracy, even if this was all totally necessary, most of this work is simple data entry, which could easily be done by a trained receptionist. But because only doctors are deemed worthy of these specific tasks, they have to spend their valuable time filling out online forms, a cost which is ultimately passed along to their patients. America has by far the highest medical administration cost per capita anywhere in the world. We spend more than triple the runner-up, which is Germany, and bureaucratic administration is basically their cultural identity. Mandated inefficiency is just one of the causes. A simple combination of bottlenecking the number of doctors entering the field and then wasting their time once they are there means that their hours become extremely valuable. Medical schools have realized this, which means that they can charge more. And even the doctors themselves, who largely do just want to help people, aren't going to turn down a far higher than average income, because they need it to pay off their far higher than average debt. The same goes for things like indemnity insurance, licensing, and training. All of these things can be expensive because doctors are paid well. But doctors need to be paid well because everything they do to maintain their professional standings is expensive. But alright, so far all of this is still only counting the groups that do still largely want to help people. And of course, these little inefficiencies have snowballed into something much larger. There are fewer than 1 million direct patient care physicians in America, but over 20 million people employed by the healthcare industry in total, with an alarming share doing very little in the way of actually caring for anybody's health. So it's time to learn how money works to find out how it got this bad and why it's become almost impossible to undo. If you've ever looked at a system like healthcare and wondered why it never seems to change, then this free report from HubSpot called Industries Ripe for Disruption is exactly what you should read next. It breaks down the industries that are most overdue for major change and explains what's holding them back. This report covers everything from healthcare and education to real estate and insurance. Basically, the sectors where outdated business models and regulation have created massive inefficiencies. If you've ever looked at an industry and thought, how has nobody fixed this yet? This report digs into exactly that. My favorite section is the breakdown of what makes an industry disruptable in the first place. Things like high customer frustration, fragmented incumbents, and regulatory moats that are starting to crack. It's the kind of framework that actually changes how you evaluate opportunities. Whether you're looking to build something in one of these spaces or just want to understand where the biggest shifts are coming, this is worth bookmarking. This resource was made by HubSpot, who's sponsoring this video. Download it for free at the link in my description and see what sectors are next. Okay. So another group that is often overlooked in this whole equation are the hospitals themselves. Like a lot of things in the economy, hospitals and practices have become another entrenched strain on the system simply because of how consolidated they have become. Medical groups have become so dominant in certain areas that patients effectively have no other options if they want a certain procedure outside of traveling several hours. At the same time, the number of doctors that run their own private practice has been consistently shrinking, as the industry pressure has pushed doctors into these collective health systems. Oh, and well, you know I had to bring it up eventually. But the Government Accountability Office has also pointed out the role of private equity in strategically buying up regional medical practices to create local monopolies on care. Now, anti-competitive practices are nothing new in any industry anymore. The FTC has been infamously flaccid with their enforcement for the last 45 years. But the medical industry in particular gets away with a lot more than it should for two specific reasons. The first is that healthcare is complicated. The average regulator hasn't been to medical school to argue against industry groups claiming that a merger is necessary for patient outcomes. The second is that the actual costs that come out of these mergers are extraordinarily opaque. Of course, public enemy number one in this whole game are the private insurance companies, and don't worry, we will get to them soon enough. But a lot of these combined groups have become so large that not even insurance providers can push back against their market power. If a hospital system has a monopoly over a critical medical service in an area, people will change their insurance if their current insurance provider doesn't cover that network. Large insurers do have more negotiating power than individual payers, but if a hospital is the only game in town, there really isn't much they can do. This consolidation has also pushed insurers into all-or-nothing contracts, where large health systems will require insurers to include all their facilities in their coverage, including the expensive ones, or else they won't provide access to any of them. Now, obviously, health insurers aren't the victim here, but in certain areas, this does prevent them from making a narrower network of providers just offering basic services for a potentially more cost-effective plan. All-or-nothing contracts also incentivize hospitals to provide services that may not have been demanded, even by the massively distorted market, since they are being strong-armed into covering it anyway. Even for services provided to patients on Medicare, there are logical incentives that push up prices. One of the key groups that decide how much a medical service should cost Medicare is the Specialty Society Relative Value Scale Update Committee. A bit of a mouthful, so it's normally called RUC. This is a group of 31 physicians who volunteer to provide guidance on how to value a physician's work for computing healthcare prices. Now, naturally, a group of physicians would like to say that physicians are worth quite a lot. But this group is also overwhelmingly made up of specialists, creating a bias that overvalues specialist procedures over simple primary care. Now, the reason why this is important is because the prices this group lays out are almost always adopted by Medicare, and the prices adopted by Medicare act as a price floor template for the rest of the industry as a whole with various built-in markups. Honestly, it's not too dissimilar to how government treasuries determine the rates that people pay on their home loans and credit cards. All of these conflicting groups obviously create a lot of friction in an already very complex industry, which also allows for other groups to cash in ways that are harder to notice with everything else going on. Pharmaceutical companies make roughly 40% of their global revenue here in America, even though we have 4% of the world's population. It's no secret that we massively overpay for medicine, but within this whole mess, who's going to notice? The US market has become so lucrative that we have effectively subsidized R&D for the rest of the world, because selling a new drug to Americans is so profitable that every other country can basically just break even. And then, of course, boxing this whole thing in are health insurance companies, which may get some pushback from some of the big healthcare groups, but can still ultimately pass everything along to regular consumers, in costs that are usually obfuscated by employer healthcare plans. These guys keep everything out of sight and out of mind for most people, until they actually need to deal with it. And then, of course, they have an incentive to delay, deny, and defend. Even if it did function without this logjam of conflicting interests, healthcare is never going to be a normal market. The information asymmetry is huge. The groups paying the bills are rarely the ones receiving the support. Prices are borderline impossible to find, and even if you could get access to this information and actually understand it, you can't shop around while you're dying. Now, it certainly doesn't help that the regulators who should be in there trying to direct this traffic jam towards something slightly more functional are being paid off by these various parties to let them get a little bit further ahead in traffic at the expense of making it impossible to fix the system as a whole. According to Open Secrets, the healthcare sector is the #1 lobbying spender in the country, spending almost $750 million in 2024 alone, just at the federal level. But now the thing is, this has been going on for so long that even if it was completely fixed and ironed out tomorrow, there is too much built up in it. Every one of these groups employs tens of thousands of people to negotiate, coordinate, lobby, market to, or just plain old sue all of the other groups. Each and every one of these groups is just trying to serve their own self-interest, but none of those interests are aligned. And the group that is consistently made to compromise is the patient right in the middle of everything with the least understanding and negotiating power. Another slightly darker visual metaphor is that often rats will get their tails caught together, and as they run to try and free themselves, they only end up pulling the knot tighter. Collectively, this administrative bloat built to service the administrative bloat is one of the largest employers in the country, and, at least up until recently, has been one of the only industries safe from layoffs. If we could snap our fingers tomorrow and replace our healthcare system with something like what exists in Australia, we would lose 7.5% of our economic, productivity, and shed millions of these jobs. It's also worth noting that Australia's system is not exactly an unfair comparison. They also have very well compensated doctors on average. They have extremely good health outcomes and rely on a blended system of private health insurance and public Medicare. Either way, this would be a larger hit to both of these numbers than the global financial crisis. However, that doesn't mean it's not worth trying, because over time, this problem is only getting worse. The size of the healthcare industry has consistently been growing faster than the size of the overall economy. By 2033, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services predicts that more than 1/5 of our entire economy will be dedicated to healthcare and the apparatus that is built up around it. But just like healthcare has slowly grown on the economy, it can also slowly be disassembled over time as well. Simple things like antitrust enforcement, proper lobbying regulation, and more transparency will at the very least deal with the elements that are intentionally trying to pile more logs into the logjam. We may lose some jobs like internal auditors for the legal firms, servicing the investment banks, managing the deals between market information providers, giving leads to pharmaceutical sales businesses that sell third-party generic substitutes to regional healthcare groups, but that's just measuring the downsides. One of the biggest hurdles to skilled professionals starting businesses of their own is losing the healthcare security that comes along with being a skilled professional. Removing one of the biggest obstacles to genuine business development in the long term would be far healthier for the economy than piling another layer of administration on top of our healthcare system. Finally, it might also solve what some consider to be one of the most existential problems in the world. We aren't having enough babies. But when a visit to the hospital can be bankrupting, maybe this shouldn't be too shocking. Especially to the same group of people who want to replace us all with AI anyway. But go and watch this video next to find out why they still really want you to have a child anyway, because it gets really weird. There was a lot more to talk about in this video, which I will be writing a newsletter on in my totally free newsletter Compounded Daily. So make sure to sign up for that if you want to learn about it more. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.